So the subject we're going to be talking about today is that of surrender. Now, one of the first things that popped into my head when it comes down to the idea of surrender, and everyone by now knows that I'm really into the music stuff, is Bruce Springsteen's song No Surrender, which has been in my head pretty much ever since. And that was quickly followed by Tom Petty's song Won't Back Down, you know, the one where you can stand me up at the gates of hell and I won't back down. Now, I thought it was funny that when I think of the subject of surrender, that the idea of no surrender comes up. The first thoughts that come into my head are based on the idea of, oh, hell no, I ain't gonna do that. And this really comes down to the idea of the word surrender in its lowest form, is that idea of giving up, waving a white flag, and is often looked upon, at least in those forms, as a sign of weakness. I mean, if you really look at the words according to the Gospel of Springsteen or Tom Petty, it's about talking yourself into standing at the gates of hell, armed with nothing but a water pistol and a firm belief of success. I mean, who would want to wave the proverbial white flag and appear to give up in those circumstances? But as we know, surrender is more than simply a belief in giving up as a sign of weakness. But it's an important part of learning how to come unstuck from the things, especially negativity, that can hold us back. Even when people openly do admit to surrender, this isn't a once and done deal. It is not a waving the white flag, but rather it's a conscious decision that needs to be made time and time again in various situations. And some of those situations, it's not about giving up, but rather the ability to speak up, set healthy boundaries, stop being an emotional doormat for others, and learning to let go of the causes of suffering that may have been holding us back. Now, one of the readings before this message was a Hebrew prayer that talked about freedom from slavery, being freed from the Pharaoh that was holding the people captive. And there's another similar parable-like reading from a book called Jacob the Baker by Noah Ben Shea. And part of that story goes, "Don't be afraid to learn from fear," said Jacob. "It teaches us what we are frightened of. Look carefully, and you will see that we are all orchards hiding in seeds. You will see inside each of us is the Pharaoh, and inside every Pharaoh is a slave, and inside every slave is the Moses. We must lead ourselves out of the enslavement we have constructed called Pharaoh. We must be the Moses in our Egypt. We must be the mountain in our desert, and we are the borders we must cross to enter the promised land." The prayer in this reading reminds us that even the Moses within us needs to take action. When people talk about reading or studying about higher power to learn about it, it can give them some information about whatever a higher power may be, but the trick is they need to experience it. If they don't experience it, then they're missing the point, which is that unless we take action, we risk continuing to be stuck in our captivity with whatever our Pharaoh is continuing to hold us prisoner with. If we do not remember our past, we are destined to repeat it. I'm sure you've all heard that quote before. If we do not remember that in the past how our substance or unhealthy behavior held us back, we risk once more allowing ourselves to become hijacked by it again. If we forget the Pharaoh who once held us prisoner, we will surely become enslaved by it once more. And on that note, if we remember that inside of us is also the decision maker, that with the help of something greater than us, whether you call that God, universe, discipline, community, which can give us the guidance we frequently need, we can then learn that we can let go of the cause of suffering that attaches us to that Pharaoh. Once more, as the book Jacob the Baker says, we must lead ourselves out of the enslavement we have constructed and called Pharaoh. We must be the Moses in our Egypt, and we are the borders we must cross to enter the promised land. Roughly translated, this means we must take our power back from the things that have enslaved us, our Pharaoh. We must learn to find that voice that will speak up for our freedom, our inner Moses. And we are the ones that tend to put up the barriers that prevent us from walking into our promised lands of hope and happiness. Surrender, as Joseph Campbell would say, is we must become willing to let go of the life we planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. It's not as simple as doing what we're told, being compliant. It's about understanding why we are doing these things. It's about wrestling with authenticity. Now, part of the problem, as Buddhist author Kevin Griffin, who wrote several books including Recovering Joy, A Mindful Life After Addiction, says, is something we simply can't let go because we are so habituated in our fears, resentments, and grief. Sometimes we simply can't let go because we are so habituated to our fears, resentments, and grief. Now, I think Kevin Griffin nails it here because surrender can be that process of learning how to let go of things. Typically the things that have been embedded in our minds and our hearts for many years that have negatively impacted us. Some of these things may have left emotional and traumatic scars on our souls, on our psyche. And as I said, become embedded into who we believe we are, or how we may react or respond. As a reaction to our fears, resentment, grief, and even shame, we seek to numb out the pain that these things create for us by using a substance that takes us further into disconnecting from ourselves and deeper into that captivity back with the Pharaoh. So surrender may be the inner Moses, the reminder that we need to learn how to reprogram our brains, whether through therapy, learning who we can trust and talk to about these things, or simply making the opposite decisions of what we used to do when our addiction, which, by the way, is a definition of spiritual awakening in the Big Book, making the opposite decision of what we used to do when we were in our addiction. In order to begin that process of freeing ourselves from our inner Pharaoh and taking those barriers down so that we can live into the life that is waiting for us. We must become willing to let go of the life we planned so as to accept the one that is waiting for us. This also speaks of the unknown. Surrender is about learning how to recognize the need to move towards something unfamiliar, which can seem uncomfortable. It speaks of, as another reading said, that we do not have control over our future, but we do have control over our habits and actions right now. And in turn, those habits and actions can determine our future. If we choose to use or drink today, that determines the experiences and situations that we will find ourselves in tomorrow. And likewise, if we remain sober and connected to a healthy support system today, that too will determine our experiences and situations that we will find ourselves in tomorrow. So, the big question, what is surrender? How do we surrender? First of all, surrender ultimately is a paradox. It's not about giving up, but at the same time, to a degree, it is. It's not about holding tightly to control, but it also means to take one's power and control back. A book called The Power of Surrender by Judith Orloff lists 7 habits of people who are healthily able to live into the concept of surrender, and I'm going to highlight about 6 of them. So the first one is recognizing you can't control everything. Let's face it, when it comes to addictions, we have tried to control things, maybe hide, sneak, manipulate others, or even said the infamous words of, "I'll only have 2 drinks tonight." Because if we believe that we can control our drinking or using, then we don't have a problem, right? Another book I once read stated that if you are trying to control your drinking or drugging, then you are already out of control. It highlights that paradox right there. There are some things that will never be in our control, and we have to learn how to shake the dust from our feet and move on from those things. There's a reason why the Serenity Prayer asks us to learn how to accept the things that we cannot change, because when we try and control the things that are out of our control, it keeps us focused on what is unhealthy for us and prevents us from focusing on the life that is waiting for us, as Joseph Campbell might say. Now remember this, you may be powerless to change a situation, but you always have the power to change your own attitude. Point 2, the people who accept surrender are comfortable with uncertainty. Now, comfortable is a loaded word. A psychologist who worked here some years back stated that it's less about comfort and more about familiarity. Think about it. Imagine that you're driving down a country road. It's a new road. It's one you've never experienced before. It's the middle of the night. It's got all of these typical country road twists and turns. It feels uncomfortable, but that's because it's unfamiliar. Now, if you drive that same road every night for a year, it will no longer be uncomfortable because you've become more familiarized with it. So it's similar with this. Healthily surrendered people allow themselves to be present to the moment and work to take each situation as it comes, seeking to remain curious about new and unfamiliar situations and to learn from them. One of the earlier readings had a quote that reads, "Peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the absence of inner conflict." Whether this uncertainty is positive or negative, healthily surrendered people learn how to adapt and recognize that the situation does not control them, rather their attitude to the situation will. Will they let their inner Pharaoh try to hold them captive once more? Or will they let their voice of freedom speak up and take things one day at a time? Bullet point 3. Breathe, just breathe. All too often when we feel under pressure, we get tense. You may or may not be someone who's into meditating, but at the very least, remember to breathe. It's something we do all the time. You know, it comes naturally to us, but the problem is that we don't tend to pay attention to it. We don't focus on it. And when we're stressed, our breathing can become shallow, or we can hold our breath, sometimes without even realizing it. Now, if we can stop what we're doing, take some slow, deep breaths, even if only for 30 seconds, 10 seconds, even 5 seconds. This can help ground us and create room for the space to make a less impulsive and more informed decision. It can lower the stress levels that we might be carrying in our bodies. It can lower our blood pressure even. Point 4 reads, true power comes from respect and listening. Too often we may think we need to be the loudest, the most outgoing, sometimes even the most aggressive person in the room to be seen as powerful. But a healthily surrendered person recognizes that by learning how to stop, listen, and express empathy with others, this is what creates connection. And connection with others is true power. think step 12, how helping others can in turn help you. And point 6, you can admit when you're wrong. Oh, this is a fun one. This is something that does not come easy to a lot of us, even the best of us. But why is that? Do we see ourselves as failures if we're wrong? Or are we so passionate about something that if someone disagrees with us, we feel like they're judging us? However we seek to learn how to live into this, it can be helpful to find a support of trusted mentors who we can be open with, who we can learn to develop trust in, and be open to sharing the situation with them, and receiving and actually listening, and maybe even acting on their feedback. Another practical idea is to recognize that this is basically the purpose of step 10, the daily inventory, that says when we were wrong, promptly admit it. Which certainly means that we're no longer holding on to the resentments or fears that take up our time and try and keep us hostage once more. A paraphrased quote from the book, The Power of Surrender, reads, "Surrender is a daily practice. Sometimes it means surrendering fear and surrendering to the power of love. Other times it may mean giving up any worries or plans to whatever God is for you, and recognizing that you're not alone on your journey, whether this God is from a spiritual or religious concept or a more practical understanding of community or higher power from that more secular point of view, community, or even that concept of love." The point of surrender is to let go of the negative emotions that keep us in a fearful state. Then we can feel more joy and compassion in our lives. And so as you begin the process of surrender, please recognize that this is a work in progress, not a once and done deal, that there will be many pharaohs in your life that will try and take you back into captivity if you let them. But always be aware that you also have that inner Moses, your source of guidance, and the habits or behaviors that you do, which can either lead you back to Pharaoh or to your source of joy and happiness. Amen.